racism. So we've had a variety of topics, and this topic is very close to all of our hearts at the Center for Justice and Reconciliation. A lot of the work that our students see on campus is around worker justice and fair trade, but we have a lot of external work going on in the community that is anti-human trafficking focused. And so one of the things that is happening around the nation right now is a fight to legalize prostitution. We're going to be hearing more from an expert tonight about that, what that looks like, what that means in our culture, how we're seeing it happen, and why will it inflict more harm than good. So this is going to be a deep dive tonight into something that is happening that most people aren't even aware of, but it is a movement across the nation that we're watching really closely. Before I introduce our speaker for tonight, who is zooming in to join us, I'm going to invite our student leaders up to give a few announcements about both CJR events and Mosaic events. So come on up.
Hello, everyone. So first I can just go ahead and read off the Mosaic. If you want to go to the next slide. All right, so upcoming events, the 17th at 5:30 is Unite and MEA and the Hawaii Collab, The Beauty of Difference. And on the 21st at 7 is an off-campus excursion with Unite. The 22nd at 5:30 is All Us Game Night. The next day at 12 is Delta Alpha Pi, Dog Day Anxiety Awareness. And the same day at 5:30 is the Hawaii Beach Cleanup. All right, now for the CJR's upcoming events. First, we have on the 22nd from 3 to 4:30, conversation with Nadia Bowles-Weber, which is going to be in the Greek Amphitheater. And that will be great because she is one of our Writers Symposium guests. And so we're going to be able to dig deeper after we have that discussion with her. Also, March 4th, 11 to 12 is our collaborative summit. So if you're interested in some of the trafficking related conversations going on today, that will be a great event to get plugged into. On the 16th at 5 is our next Cup of Culture. So exactly a month from today, same place, same time. And on the 21st through the 25th of March, normally we do something called Wear Justice, where it's just a few events throughout the week focused on ethical clothing consumption. But this year we're amping it up and we have a full week of events and we have some pretty cool prizes for if you can go to every single event that week. This is what it looks like. Drink justice, do justice, wear justice, eat justice, and finally live justice. So we hope you can join us in all of our justice activities that week.
Thank you, Katrina. And for those of you joining us online who aren't students, everybody's welcome at these events of the center. I would really like to encourage you all to come out next week for Nadia Bowles-Weber. The ticketed event that night costs something, but our event in the Greek is free, and we're going to have a conversation with her. If you haven't heard her confessional or her podcast, it's called The Confessional, and it's a really fascinating look at shame. She calls it a car wash for shame, and people basically come onto her podcast and confess something that they haven't ever told anybody that they've done. And it's really a fascinating look at human nature and kind of what drives us into shame. She is a very lively speaker. I don't know if students know her writing, but she has some pretty amazing writing out there and podcasts and webinars and such. So not to miss next week, along with all the other events, but really wanted to plug that. So with that, I'm going to kick this off and hand it off to our expert speaker tonight. We are very honored to have Sarai Smith-Mazariegos, excuse my broken gringo talk here. But we are thrilled to have her tonight. She is an expert around this issue of the legalization of prostitution. She is fighting tirelessly right now to help people around our state and across the nation understand what some of this legislation that is on the table would actually mean for the population of people who are exploited through trafficking. And she has a long history in this work. She has worked with high-risk youth for close to 2 decades and has is noted for achieving some really groundbreaking strides in the field, both with survivors of domestic violence, sex trafficking, runaway and homeless youth, foster care and probation minors, group homes and shelters, juvenile courts, and in the last 15 years, supporting CSEX specific services. CSEX stands for the commercial exploitation of children. So we couldn't have anybody more knowledgeable about this subject. She is part of the effort in our state. She's leading the effort in our state right now. And so we're going to give her the next period of time to tell us about what's going on, what it looks like, and what some of the impact will be. So welcome and thank you for being here with us.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Sarai Smith-Mazariegos, and I am the Executive Director for SHADE Movement. SHADE stands for Survivors Healing, Advising, and dedicated to empowerment. We provide direct services here in California for survivors that are experiencing or, exiting trafficking, those who's been prostituted, commercially sexually exploited, and also domestic violence. And so I'm actually here today representing one of my new initiatives called Freed Collective. And so I'm going to actually put up my slides now and continue to talk to you guys. So let's. Sorry about that. I guess it didn't want to start for me. All righty. So this is our new initiative, which is called Freed Collective. It stands for Real Equality Ending Demand. That is our focus. I'm sorry, there we go. All right. So Freed Collective, again, our vision is a life of freedom and opportunity for everyone and the elimination of all forms of sexual violence and oppression. And this is really important just due to the state of what we're dealing with here in California and all over the US. So we created Freed to really educate and equip and strengthen local communities who wish to expose the realities of the impact of commercial sex industries on individuals, families, and communities. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you because I hate to read at people, but as you can see, Freed was founded by SHADE Movement, which is my organization, as well as Runaway Girl. And we have additional founding members such as Survivors for Solution, National Youth Law Center, California Against Slavery, Phoenix Rising, and the Well Path, as well as community activists. A lot of these organizations are actually survivor-led, such as also SHADE Movement is survivor-led and survivor-based. So again, this is something that was developed and informed by survivors, which is very key to delivering valuable information to your communities. We also have some core values. Again, as you guys can see, it's really important that we effectively address this issue of the sex trade without leading with the thoughts and ideas and voices of exited survivors of commercial sexual exploitation. We cannot truly disrupt human trafficking unless survivor experts are at the forefront of this movement, not in the back, not in the middle, but at the forefront. And we have to be sure that when we're helping those that are exploited, that we're creating comprehensive services, opportunities so that they can succeed. And that includes trauma-informed medical, mental health services, housing, education, and job training, and economic opportunities. And unfortunately, there is a lack of a lot of these comprehensive services, unfortunately, which is why it's so crucial when we're talking about decriminalization of prostitution. So I'm not going to read all of this to you. I encourage you to go to our website and check us out, get familiar with us. We also have toolkits, one-pagers, so that you can continue to learn about the issue of decriminalization of prostitution. So now we're going to go into the presentation. And we call our presentation, Can We Truly Stay Neutral Regarding Systems of Prostitution? The reason we say this is because everyone has their understanding of prostitution. Everyone typically who are knowledgeable also has their own understanding of decriminalization of prostitution, but there's different forms of decriminalization. Right now we have full decriminalization and we have partial decriminalization. And we're going to talk about what those two things mean. And you have folks who are for full decriminalization and then folks who are for partial decriminalization. This is a huge fight all over the US and nationally. It's been going on for decades. But right now, this issue is in our face and it's not going anywhere. It's now time for the US to determine, is the US for full decriminalization or is the US for partial decriminalization? I want us to really acknowledge that prostitution causes damage to those in it, and it could never be made safe. Its existence makes women's human rights to equality with men a distant pipe dream. The reality is prostitution is damaging. How is it not damaging? For centuries, it has not changed. It has never valued women's rights, especially over their bodies, ever. So how is this something we want to allow in our society? Why do we want our children to grow up thinking that this is an option, to have someone buy your body, to have someone use your body? And then if you disagree, then they abuse you, beat you. How is that something okay? How is that a woman's right? Something for us all to think about. All right. So now we're going to go into the models of prostitution, which is what I was previously talking about, full decriminalization or partial decriminalization. Okay. So here, typically, we're talking, you hear me refer to partial decriminalization, which is also considered the Nordic model or the equality model. Unfortunately, there are different names that's been developed throughout the years around the Nordic model, but the Nordic model is the name that it was first given. So the Nordic model approach to prostitution, right, decriminalizes all those who are prostituted and provides support services to help them exit to a better life, but it makes buying people for sex a criminal offense. So again, right now in the US, you're going to hear people call it the equality model, and you're also going to hear people call it partial decrim. The Nordic model isn't really used here in the US. It is, however, used in other countries such as Sweden, Norway, Iceland. Those are the countries who have previously adopted the Nordic model. And actually in 1999, Sweden adopted it first. So they were the first country to actually adopt the Nordic model. I'll give you guys just a second just to read that, just in case you want to read that. So just to, clarify that the equality model, partial decriminalization, is to end prostitution and sex trafficking without prosecuting sex workers. Okay. Then you have the legalization, okay? And this is pretty much where the government directs regulations around prostitution. It also includes, methods of zoning requirements, advertising requirements, as well as getting mandatory testing around STDs. However, if you have conversations with a lot of sex groups who are for full decriminalization, they don't even want legalization. Right now, legalization is in Nevada, and they're currently fighting to get full decriminalization versus legalization in Nevada. So going to decriminalization, which is full decrim, this is the removal of all laws. So that means no one is going to be criminalized for any type of acts. So under decriminalization, this type of legislation, pimps, traffickers, brothel owners, and managers could operate as ordinary businessmen and exploit some of the most vulnerable and abused women in our midst, and pretty much do it with a government stamp of approval. This law will also turn sex buyers into paying customers. And what's the merchandise? It's the bodies of women and children. So again, is this something that we're actually going to agree to in the land of freedom? That's what California is. That's what the US is all about. But if we do this, then in reality, we're putting a lot of vulnerable women and children in a prison that they can't get out of. So going back to the equality model, for us to understand that decriminalized, we want those who are prostituted and trafficked to be decriminalized, right? We want to help those who seek to exit the sex trade and rebuild their lives. That's who we want to provide support to. But we want to hold accountable pimps, brothel owners, and buyers for the harm that they cause. I want us to acknowledge that the global sex trade is $120 million, okay, on and offline industry, where every dollar of profit is fueled by human pain. And this isn't what we want, which is why the equality model focuses on the rights of those who have been exploited while holding buyers and exploiters accountable for the harm that they cause. So it's also important to recognize that on one side are those who argue for full decriminalization or legalization of the entire commercial sex industry. Again, those that are for full decriminalization are pimps, brothel owners, and sex buyers. And these are primarily the folks who are focusing on sex workers' rights, okay? Because they benefit from it in a large way. And then of course you have, like I've already said, on the other side, who wants the equality model, partial decriminalization. We want to make sure, that so services are involved and that the decriminalization of those who are prostituted or trafficked are getting support, but we're holding pimps and brothel owners, buyers accountable. And we just have to really, I think it's just important for us just to acknowledge that the sex trade is where sex trafficking happens. And there's so much out there that says that that's not true. But we're going to get into that a little bit later on. Don't worry, because that is very key. This next one, I'm actually going to show a video. So I'm going to switch. The video unfortunately doesn't work through this outlet. So I'm going to skip over to that. 1 second, please. Where are you at? Okay.
I became involved in street-based prostitution back in 1991. I was 15 at the time, and then followed 7 years of prostitution in various areas of the sex trade. At 22, I managed to extricate myself from that life.
In my 9 years in the streets, in prostitution, being prostitution or bought, sold and exploited by men, I've never come across one woman who said that they recognize this activity as work. All of us recognized it as a means of survival when there were few or no other options for us.
Prostitution is neither sex nor work. It's not sex because there's no mutuality involved. So that's not sex, that's sexual abuse. And it's not work because we should never dignify exploitation with the term of work. So no, I would never use that terminology, and I'd strongly advise nobody else to use it either.
I think we need to understand the implications of the language we use. If we call sex work work, then it is work like any other, and people can be compelled to do it.
I was in prostitution for 9 years, and initially I had a time frame of getting into prostitution because we were in debt and were on the verge of losing the only thing that we had as a home and the shack we lived in. My time frame was a month. At tops. I was going to get the money, pay the debt for my mother, and then maybe get a little more money to start up something like a little or small business or informal business. But 9 years later, I found myself still trapped within the system of prostitution.
And the impact is always the same. It's always psychological, emotional, spiritual devastation, quite frankly.
I'm worried about the fact that the words sex work is also creeping into the vocabulary of the United Nations. And that worries me because I think it represents also an attitude, and I feel worried about that. And I believe that we should look carefully at the, as you said, also the motives are to protect women who are very vulnerable and exposed. So how do we do that in the best possible way?
Prostitution absolutely should not be fully decriminalised, and there is a great deal of confusion around this in the world. People think that by decriminalising prostitution, what's meant is decriminalising the prostituted persons involved. But that's only one element of the full decriminalisation model. The other elements involve decriminalising pimps, decriminalising brothel keepers, decriminalising all third-party profiteers, and of course decriminalising the men who abuse and exploit women within that system. So absolutely no, I don't believe that this entire ugly, brutal system should be decriminalised, not at all. The only parties who ought to be decriminalised are the exploited persons caught up within it.
If it is decriminalized, we stand the danger of prostitution being offered to those who are underprivileged and poor black women and girls, in my context of South Africa, as a solution to their poverty.
I'm not long back from New Zealand, where prostitution is fully decriminalised, by which that means pimping is fully decriminalised, sex buying, brothel keeping, all of those things are fully decriminalised in New Zealand. And this is how bad it's got. The women tell me, the street reach women who do the outreach work, they tell me that they used to work with 6 to 8 women a night. Since decriminalisation 13 years ago, now it's in the region of 50. So it has exploded. I think that the majority of funding agencies that fund the call for the full decriminalisation of prostitution genuinely don't understand the call that they are answering, because the call they are answering involves decriminalising exploitative parties, sexually exploitative parties, financially exploitative parties.
It is going to perpetuate patriarchy. It is going to create a situation where men feel entitled to women's bodies, to access them, to commodify and objectify for their own sexual gratification.
If I had a message for them, it would be to look more deeply into what it is that you are funding and to ask direct questions. Is this money, for example, going to go towards decriminalising pimps and brothel keepers? Is this where you want your funding to go? Is this really the influence you want your organisation to have in the world?
I feel that prostitution should not be fully decriminalized, but should be abolished altogether to realize women's equality.
All right, you guys, I'm going to switch back over. Just give me 1 second, please. All right. So I think it's just important for us to really acknowledge that prostitution hides rape, torture, sexual trauma, and exploitation under the term work. I think a lot of folks hear, oh, sex work, and think that this is a real job, like a real job. It's work. But in reality, once again, it's just hiding the reality of prostitution. That's what it is. This is not sex work. It's called prostitution. It's been called prostitution. And now we want to start calling it something else to hide the reality. It is prostitution, and this is dangerous. There is nothing safe about it. And this is all important information because it's up to you guys to go and educate your peers and your communities on the reality of this situation. Prostitution is oppression. Being oppressed means the absence of choice. If we really understand why people get involved in prostitution, why folks are forced into prostitution, forced into trafficking, once again, there is absence of choice. And this is something that we have to really understand and stop thinking that folks are choosing, want to be a prostitute. I've never had a conversation with a prostitute where they express that they want to be there. 90% of them, there's plenty of studies around it. And from those studies, it's the same thing that these individuals tell me when I speak to them, when I support them. They don't want to be here. They want the same opportunities as everyone else, but they feel due to their abuse that they've experienced as children throughout their lives has really limited them due to poverty, their own environments. Prostitution is normalized in the hood. Like, that's something that we have to really come to understand, how our own environments can influence us, how our own environments influences and creates pimps and traffickers. But we also have to sit here and remember that those that are talking about sex work, are middle-class white women that are not dealing with oppression or marginalized individuals. So you may have a middle-class white woman saying, oh, I don't get beat. I don't get disrespected. Oh, this isn't happening to me. But then you will have marginalized and people of color tell you a whole different situation. I'm here to protect those that are marginalized and disenfranchised. So who benefits from full decriminalization? Those leading the sex workers movement, right? Those who enjoy violence towards women, those in the sex trade, pimps and traffickers, buyers. I put LGBTQ there with a question mark because you will have the sex workers movement telling you that it benefits LGBTQ. Yet they all express the same thing about the violence, about how dangerous it is. And because this has been such a huge fight here in the US and locally here in California, I've heard many trans women express that this is their only way of survival, right? And that hits my heart. For anyone to think that that is their only way of survival, we are really lacking. We really suck as a society if we have people thinking that this is the only way they can survive. This is their only means of survival. We have so much work to do. And again, just going back, if it's such a great, empowering job opportunity, why do so many don't want to be a part of it? So I thought it was really important for us to really just understand what pimping is. Because sometimes I feel like I talk to folks about the demand and I feel like they don't understand what pimping is. I even had someone tell me that pimping is not violent. And I'm like, where you come from? How is pimping not violent? As a survivor of child commercial sexual exploitation, I know firsthand. So I can't really understand how anyone can think that pimping isn't violent, okay? I want us to understand that pimping is motivated by the opportunity of making money, selling women and girls in the sex industry, okay? And the only way they can do that is by gaining control over that person's mind and body. And that is done through force, fraud, and coercion. And once that starts happening, you fear for your life. So you're going to do what you're told to do so that you can survive another day. Every single day that someone is out there being prostituted, trafficked, could be their last day. And that is a huge reality. So just giving you guys examples of what force would look like, what fraud would look like, etc. So you can really have a clear understanding of really what this looks like for someone that is being controlled by a pimp or a trafficker. All right. Also, I wanted to share this with you guys, just different profiles of someone who would buy sex from a child or a woman. But I wanted to really share with you guys the situational abuser, okay? So this is pretty much a person who pretty much is kind of like your next door neighbor who you see, in the morning, drops their kids off to work. Drops their kids off to school, and then they go to work, and then they come home. You might see them in the yard with their kids. Again, everyday Joe that lives in your neighborhood that you may think is so harmless and, oh, he would never do that. those are typically situational abusers. Meaning, if they want to buy a kid, I'm sorry, excuse me, if they want to buy someone, right? And they end up in a hotel room and that person comes in who they bought, right? They don't know who that person is. They didn't really give any type of, criteria or anything like that, except for, I want to pay to have sex with someone. Give me somebody pretty, this, right? And then that person comes in and he can clearly see that this is a 14, 15-year-old girl. Do you think he's going to open up the door and say, hey, I didn't ask for a kid? Give me somebody of age? Not at all. He's going to do what he came there to do. Those are situational abusers. Again, people who are just going to take advantage of the situation because it's what it is. And they're there for their own pleasure, So of course, these type of people would be difficult to identify. And they're often protected by those around them who find it once again impossible to accept that Mr. Joe next door, the husband, the brother, their son, could possibly do this. Kind of very similar to when it comes to judges, doctors, lawyers, right? They have a certain status in the world, right? A certain position where people respect them. Oh, they could never be a situational abuser or a pedophile, right? So they constantly get passes. All right. So sharing this with you, because this was a study that was done when it came to purchasers. And again, just recognizing, there's many types of Johns, but most common Johns are the ones that I just spoke about, which is situational abuser. Again, an average male, often with a good job and a family at home, okay? But also has a sense of entitlement and sees themselves as respectable. Again, it goes back to his own needs and has no empathy for the person that is exploited. Whether it's a woman or a child or a boy, man, it doesn't matter. They're there for their own pleasure. And that is the focus. And this is something I tend to call serial rape. That is what prostitution is. That is what trafficking is. It is serial rape. You cannot consent to something where there is no choice. And I do want to acknowledge, buyers are violent as well. And, it's a 50-50 risk with buyers. But traffickers and pimps, they're always violent. So just want to acknowledge that the majority of those prostituted entered the sex trade before their 15th birthday, often coming from abusive or neglectful homes. Again, as I previously stated, their lives have been affected by poverty, by homelessness, or failures of the foster care system. And then to only continue to experience violence at the hands of traffickers and pimps and buyers. All right. So previously we talked about who benefits by full decriminalization. Now we're going to look at who and what would be affected by full decriminalization. I already spoke about people of color in our communities, okay? Our morals and values. Like, let's think about that. Do we really want to have billboards with signs selling sex? Is that something we want to advertise and teach our children is okay? I know I have 2 girls and a boy. And when I look at my children, and I've seen signs that they've put up in subways in New York, you know, trying to get people to agree with full decriminalization, and it makes me sick to my stomach, because I never want my children to think that it's ever okay to allow someone to abuse you, to rape you, and that you're just supposed to say okay. The cycle of oppression, again, going back to different vulnerable populations, going back to LGBTQIA+, going back to children, going back to our human bodies. We talking about the Me Too movement. This is going to scratch all that if full decriminalization happens here in the US. So I want us to really look at the reality of the harms of full decriminalization, what is currently happening right now. This is the reports through studies that's been done with those who have been, you know, prostituted. As you can see, 89% are dealing with depression, anxiety, nightmares, flashbacks, low self-esteem, feeling of shame and guilt. So again, how is prostitution safe? How will it ever be safe for us to agree that decriminalizing it is going to benefit our society, benefit women and children? Where do we get that from? If we're knowledgeable of ACEs study, then we see how damaging this is, not just on a mental health level, but on a physical level. So from all of our research and our understanding, the equality model is what is going to benefit us in the long run. The sex trade does long-term damage to the body, mind, and spirit of those who are exploited. These are harms that cannot be regulated away. These harms are not going anywhere. Are we really going to sit here and think that it's okay to buy another human being? Is that going to be acceptable? Is that going to be normal? All right, I have one more video for you guys. So I got to stop this and I'll be right back.
What is prostitution? Many people say it's the world's oldest profession, that it's a job, just like any other job. But when you look at the real lives and real experiences of those in prostitution, it's clear that it's unlike any other job. 98% of those bought in prostitution are women. 99% of the buyers are men. These numbers reveal that at its very core, prostitution is a system of gender inequality. It's a system where women exist to fulfill the sexual desires of men. She is seen as a product to be bought, used, and discarded. Within this system of inequality, women in prostitution routinely endure violent, exploitative, and dehumanizing acts at the hands of sex buyers and pimps that are incomparable to any other profession. Our society has created laws against workplace sexual harassment, but in prostitution, the job is sexual harassment. One survivor said, "As a prostitute, you do not get to frame the boundaries of your sexual experience." The largest study ever conducted on prostitution revealed that 63% of women in prostitution experience rape, and 71% experienced multiple forms of physical violence. Yet another study revealed the types of violence women in prostitution experience, which included being kicked, punched, robbed, strangled, kidnapped, burnt with cigarettes, slashed with razor blades, and urinated on. As a result, the majority of women studied in prostitution met the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder on the same level as combat victims and torture victims. The mortality rate of women in prostitution is 200 times higher than the general population of women. These are not job hazards. These are statistical probabilities that women in prostitution will be sexually and physically assaulted and will suffer from severe mental and emotional trauma. This is not a job. It is a violation of human rights. It is a system of violence, exploitation, and inequality against women, and it must be stopped. Join the movement to end the business of exploitation. Share this video. Tell the world the truth about prostitution.
Okay, 1 second, you guys. Sorry about that, you guys. Okay. All right. All right. All right, so we're going to look at some regional responses to commercial sexual exploitation, give you guys a little bit more information. Come on. All righty, there we go. So here I just wanted to show you guys a map so you guys can see. Earlier we talked about, you know, the different countries that has adopted partial decriminalization, the equality model. There's only one country who's already adopted full decriminalization, and then other countries that adopted legalization, including are Nevada, USA. And then how every other country criminalizes it, right? Everyone else criminalizes it, including us. So just acknowledging that here in the US, prostitution is illegal in 49 of the 50 states because Nevada has legalized it. So I wanted to share one example with you guys pertaining to one of the countries who actually did legalization, and definitely encourage you guys to go to that article and just to learn more along with it. But as you can see from what I've highlighted, over 400,000 women were pulled into prostitution when this happened, okay? 400,000 women. Over 1 million men are now buying sex every day. This law changed, right? In 2002. So let's just think about it. Let's imagine this happening in the US. There being brothels, 3,500 brothels. So imagine a brothel being right next door to your home. How would you feel about that? These are questions that you should ask yourself. Because there's many people who are, again, for legalization and full decriminalization, because they understand the multitude of what will happen here in the US if this is something we allow. I don't know how many of you guys have been to Las Vegas. And I don't know if it's just me that I can just see everything every time I'm there, but it's overwhelming for me to see what I see, because I understand it. I understand the violence and how damaging it is for those that are in the sex industry, those that are being prostituted. I mean, it's almost like, once again, it goes back to us valuing money over people. Germany actually has a nickname. They call it the little brothel country because of this. Now, again, they say, okay, with legalization and full decriminalization, you know, those that are being prostituted, that call themselves sex workers, there's going to be protection and they're in control. Not the traffickers, not the brothel owners, right? Not the sex buyers, but they're in control of what happens. However, once again, there's been a lot more research happening where people are expressing that the brothel keepers, brothel owners, are still controlling them, still telling them what they are going to do, what they're going to do. And if they deny it, they experience harm. So we're sitting here saying, oh, full decriminalization, you're going to be safe and you're going to have control over your own money. You're going to have control over who does what, who you sleep with, and this. How is that true? If there's already plenty of examples happening right now in those different countries that have legalization, that one country that did full decriminalization. Men are able to walk into those brothels and the owners create a menu for them. there's no input from any of the women or those that are being sold. There's no input, because the reality is it is always pimping. So I want us to keep in mind that when we treat the buying or selling of other human beings as a victimless crime or not a crime at all, then we normalize it. And this normalization impacts the way men see vulnerable people, particularly who? Women and girls of color. It also impacts the way that those who are buying, it also impacts those who are bought and sold see themselves. So I know you guys are all curious about what's going on in California. So let's get into that. So what I want to acknowledge is that every 5 years here in California, the sex workers movement always comes up with something to try and get full decriminalization, okay? So this is something that's constantly happening. Oh, I forgot to put that in here, but that's okay. I don't know if you guys heard of the FOSCA bill. This was a bill that happened in 2020. And this is where it regulated online solicitation, because on Backpage, where a lot of the sex industry, adult sex industry advertised their services, where on Backpage, they were also advertising children. So there was a team of prosecutors, a lot of folks that's doing the work, pretty much created a bill called the FOSCA bill, which holds internet websites such as Backpage, those type of businesses accountable if children are being sold on your site, right? And so Backpage is done with due to the FOSCA bill. But when that bill was passed, it created a disadvantage for those, for the sex workers that were advertising, because it took away an outlet for them. And they were no longer able to advertise on the internet, which meant they had to go back to 100% kind of street-based prostitution. And let's just say they were pissed. And since then, they have strategized, coordinated, whatever you want to call it, in almost every state here in the US to pass some form of full decriminalization. And so the first hit happened in DC. That was a lot. And then after that, wasn't successful, nothing passed. They try to pass it at a city council level, but not necessarily a state level. But if that would have passed, it would have sent a ripple effect through the US. So it was beautiful that it didn't happen. However, due to that, those same efforts started to hit multiple states throughout the US, from New Hampshire to New Jersey, to Oregon, to California, to even New Mexico, to New York, and so on and so on. So this is a huge issue. But this right here that I'm sharing with you, I say discontinued because even if you go to a website, it's gone now. This was an effort that was advertised in 2019 for this to be on the ballot in 2020. And this actually was what caused us to mobilize and create Freed. Then in San Francisco, this is entirely not a bad thing at all, because again, we don't want folks who are prostituted or trafficked to be criminalized, right? We want them to be treated as humans with rights and to be seen as victims, survivors that need support services, not to be arrested and to be criminalized and then have a record that then creates more struggle for them to survive, right? But this was pretty much saying that you can report a crime and you're not going to be criminalized because law enforcement acknowledges that you're a sex worker or a prostitute, right? Because unfortunately, sometimes law enforcement officers that have a lack of training, but I'll just say that are sometimes just ignorant, will just be cruel to people that they feel are less than they are, okay? But it also goes into, if a person got condoms on them, I gonna sit there and arrest them and once again judge them for something, right? Let them be able to report what is happening to them so that they can get support and help. So this is not entirely a bad thing, but some folks felt that this was something that was pushing towards full decriminalization, which is why I'm sharing it here. In Oakland, we previously had a situation with our city council as well. And this is where they were proposing and asking the city council for money to start investigating the sex trade, to focus on the decriminalization of pimping and purchasing sex acts. So this was something that is still sitting there. We're still, kind of going back and forth with city council on eliminating it. And then currently right now, this is a bill that is at the state level, and it is very current. And really what this bill is, it's trying to take away loitering laws in prostitution areas, okay? And this is once again leading towards full decriminalization because it's removing the criminalization. So here they want to say that, we need to stop criminalizing sex workers and trans women of color, right? But this also means that this will be the same for pimps and traffickers. And this is our issue, is that this needs to be mended. The language needs to change. And there also needs to be some information included into this bill around support services for those who are being exploited out there. So this is a very loose bill that really has no foundation. And so for, I would say, the past 8 months, we've been, fighting to address this at the Capitol with the governor. And finally, the governor sent this bill back to the Assembly this week. So it's still sitting there. We still got a lot of fight to do. But the great thing is that the governor did hear our concerns, and he sent it back to the Assembly for review. So that's a huge plus. And I think it's important for, again, something else I want you guys to, ask yourself. Do women have the right to live without the sexual harassment or sexual exploitation of prostitution? Or is that right reserved only for those who have sex, race, and class privilege? Think about it. If we listen to the voices, again, we have to listen to survivors, those who have exited, okay? Not those who are still in survival mode. I'm sorry. Those who are no longer under pimp and the sex trade control. This is where we're going to get solutions from. Men who buy sex must be held accountable. And those in prostitution must be offered real alternatives for survival and never arrested. But we can't seem to do this because we can't move past pimps and profiters' lies about prostitution. I put this up here because these are just a few organizations, okay? But it's important for us to know who's supporting full decriminalization and who's supporting partial decriminalization. Because unfortunately, there are some organizations who have a huge influence that support full decriminalization. And if you're knowledgeable on this issue, on this topic of decriminalization of prostitution, I would question those, or I would question those organizations' integrity in the work that they're doing. It's also very tricky for organizations to take a position if they have staff who have different positions. That's another tricky situation within organizations that come out and say that they are in full decriminalization of support or partial decriminalization support, which is something I'm constantly having conversations with organizations about. Again, this does not equal consent. So again, you know, I feel like I keep repeating, you know, some information, but it's really important for us just to never think that the sex trade is a safer sex trade just because it's full decriminalized. It's impossible. And this is what you will hear from the other side. This is their primary argument. That the sex trade, if legalized, decriminalized, will be safer. However, there is clear evidence, as you're seeing, that that is not true. And again, from our studies, as you can see, the quality model has been proven to reduce the number of people who are trafficked or exploited. So giving you more of a comparison. And again, these studies are based off of the countries that have implemented the equality model over the course of several years. As you can see, the results are clear. Demand for prostitution is reduced, sex trafficking is reduced. So I think it's just really important for us to understand economics 101, which I know you all know about economics 101. Supply is found through any means possible, resulting in human trafficking. If we legalize prostitution, then demand will increase. And when supply cannot keep up with demand, supply will be found. That's economics 101. Thank you guys for your time. I'm definitely open to any questions. My apologies for going over time.
No problem. Thank you, Sarai, for all that information. That was really informative and a lot to take in, right, within a really short time. But we will open it up for questions for the next few minutes, about 10 minutes or so. So if you have any questions, either online, you can put it into the chat, or here in person. Be glad to pass it along to Sarai. You have a question? I have a question too. Go ahead.
So question is, we live in this space of social justice, which is a lot of times a more progressive space. And so I think that's where it can get confusing when you see organizations like ACLU and that typically are representing underrepresented populations and fighting for rights. So just for those who are maybe struggling with this idea of sex work and why it's, why would there be people out there, why would there be sex workers out there advocating for the full decrim? I don't know if that question is clear, but it's sort of this tension between, I mean, we understand, those of us who work in the space understand the exploitation. It doesn't seem logical to us. But then you have folks who share a lot of our same values and other areas of justice that we work on that would argue against this idea. And I wonder if you could speak to that a little.
Yeah, so I feel like it has to do the folks who are fighting.
We
for
can't
the-
hear you.
No.
Are you unmuted?
Yes.
And then turn your.
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Let me see. So I think really the issue is that folks feel that for any population to be denied something that they want is taking away their human rights, right? So that's why you'll have some organizations talking about this is a human right, but to me, not really truly understanding how this is going to affect the overall population, our overall society, right? And then you have those that are in survival mode, because when we're looking at sex workers movement, they are made up of those who are pimps, traffickers, those that are being, that are in prostitution that call themselves sex workers. Those people are in survival mode. They can only think about their own needs and their own benefit. They don't care what it's going to do to this child or this woman over here. They don't care. It's about their own needs. There's also a profit. So when I sit here and I think about these agencies, they profit off of this as well. So they're not going to choose something that's not going to benefit them. And I think this has been our question to, California Against Slavery, not California Against Slavery, what is that? CAS LA, and the Freedom Network, because they're working with other survivors, right? And they are coercing and manipulating those survivors that are on their team that are now exited survivors, though, and causing, to me, a lot of misinformation. And it allows people to kind of sit in limbo, not really knowing what direction they should take. But again, this goes back to us having misunderstanding around what is human rights, what is consent, what does choice really look like, right? And then also going back to the Me Too movement, because that creates confusion as well when it comes to some sex workers saying, this allows me choice over my body. Okay. I can agree to some extent for that 5% that don't get beat, that's not forced and get tied to a bed and let people come and gang rape them. I'm sorry, I can't sit here and say for you 5%, let's change the law for you 5%. And for the other 95% who are women and girls of color who are constantly beaten and abused on a daily basis and are not given choice, I can't sit there and say that I'm going to agree with you that I'm supposed to agree to choice and consent that's not even real for marginalized people.
I do want to close it out, and just for our students here and the people that are online, what are some action steps for us? What can we do for those of us that really want to get involved or want to find out more on ways to get involved here? What do you suggest some action steps would be for them? Or for
I
us?
think one thing is downloading our toolkit off our website and reading it. We even created some one-pagers because our toolkit is 20 pages. It really goes into the issue, and it really focuses on California. But we also have some one-pagers, which would be ideal for you to read it and share it. Talk about the issue, educate your community, educate your friends, educate those that are in your neighborhood, your families. But I think most importantly, we're dealing with SB 357 right now. So it's sign letters that are going to the Capitol, to the governor saying, do not pass this bill. I think those are the main ways for you to get involved right now. But again, knowledge is power. So the more knowledgeable you are, the more you can help others become knowledgeable. If you're not knowledgeable, you can't do nothing on this issue. So first, educate yourself and then share it.
Thank you so much. That is a great way to end this presentation for our students and for the people online. So I do want to thank you all for coming tonight. If you want to get involved with the CJR, please see one of our students leaders here to sign up. There's also information that goes out often, so you can sign up for that information as well. So thank you. And with that, we'll close today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.